The Curious Case of Marvel's Eternals, widely known by MCU fans and MCU detractors as the worst MCU film. Even though I had never read an Eternals comic book, I was excited for it based on all of the negative feedback. I don't mean I wanted to be a contrarian and like something that everyone hated or hate something that everyone loved. I simply mean all the things that people were ragging on the film for sounded like things that I've been asking from the MCU for a while. Tell stories that weren't so tied down to the overarching story of the MCU, and most importantly, allow the films to have some somber moments without undercutting it with comedy. And as reviews of this film kept coming out week after week, the scores on every platform were getting lower and lower and lower, and I kept asking myself, could it really be that bad? What's going on, y'all? My name is Eddie, and this is Nerdy Before It Was Cool, where we nerd out about TV and film, especially ones that have to do with comic book characters. Today's video is the first in a segment called Is It Really That Bad?, where I go back and look at TV shows and films that I either A, haven't seen or haven't seen in a long time that were just destroyed by critics, trying to determine that question, is it really that bad? In the case of Marvel's Eternals, it's complicated. Let's get into the good stuff first. First things first, let's get into the look and the feel of this film. Now, this film doesn't even look like an MCU movie. And I'm not trying to say the MCU movies look bad, but most of them have this sort of washed out color palette to them. Some of the movies look like they were supposed to be a TV show rather than an actual blockbuster film. Even though the film may have undersold on its gravitas, it does look the part. You can really see and feel Chloé Zhao on every single part of this movie. Keeping the good rolling, they had not one, but both of my babies in this movie, Angelina Jolie and Salma Hayek. Now, some of y'all watching this may be a little young, so y'all may not know these two women's track record. Let's pop it off with Salma. She's been doing her thing and has been fine as hell for my entire life. Like, this is in 1996. And they also had Angelina Jolie, and outside of just being a baddie, she literally changed the landscape for female action stars. She was getting roles that were predominantly being taken up by men. Long story short, Angelina walked so ScarJo could run. All right, I'm done being thirsty. Let's get back to the movie. In general, the cast was just great. Marvel clearly spared no expense for this movie, because that takes me into the next thing that I loved, the CGI and special effects. The MCU is a very successful, very well-loved series of movies that has fans all over the world, but we can all agree that as they've gotten bigger and more popular, their CGI has gotten worse and worse. This movie, that is not a problem at all. I don't remember one sequence of shoddy CGI. From a visual standpoint, those backtrack scenes where we go back in time and see their characterization and see how they lived on Earth before modern times, those were some of the coolest looking scenes in the entire movie. Bits and pieces of those flashbacks really made the characters feel like real people and not just celestial robot beings. Underneath the surface, there was a lot of great ideas for almost every one of these characters, but unfortunately it was under the surface and not brought to the forefront. First and foremost, before we get into some serious real nitpicks about this film, one thing that really bugged me was that weak ass sex scene. I know that's a really stupid nitpick that doesn't take away or add to the film, but if y'all would have seen how all of these articles was talking about this sex scene, this scene is gonna change the game. This scene is gonna be epic. The first MCU sex scene, yada, yada, yada. Y'all hyped up this sex scene so much and did not deliver. Why put this scene in the movie? What I would have did, a guy who has no writing credits on any movies, commercials, TV shows, or anything like that, is made this completely unnecessarily epic and ridiculous. See, I would have shot it very similar to how it was shot, but as the camera was going up and going away from him, I would have had it showing old Icarus giving her like one stroke. I would have had it like crack the side of a mountain. And that way, if people walked away from feeling like my film was bad, at least they'll remember that one scene. Be like, man, that boy Icarus gave her some premium pumps. All right, now let's get into the stuff that really bugged me about the movie. I'm a pretty easy movie fan to please, honestly. I can handle clunky dialogue, I can handle stoic performances, I can handle uninspired twists, but the pace of the movie has to be good. This film was just very poorly paced. There were a lot of great and amazing moments in this film, but they were always followed by like a sluggish slowdown where we had to just sit. I never once feared for their lives. I never once worried that they wouldn't complete whatever goal they were trying to reach, which honestly, throughout the entire film, there wasn't even really a goal until the end. And earlier I said I really like those flashbacks to when they were doing the character building. But the problem with those flashbacks is they always interrupted the story. Those flashbacks never added and pushed the story forward. You'll hear me a lot of the times in my reviews talking about characterization, and I appreciate that they tried to do that, but you can't slow down and stop the story to do it. The constant flashbacks to the past and back to the present made this movie feel like two separate films. This movie was a perfect example of trying to have your cake and eat it too. It wanted to be like an indie character drama, but also be like a grand scale epic blockbuster. And who knows, maybe Chloé Zhao is talented enough to merge those two worlds together. But nobody's talented enough to merge these two worlds together when you're forcing 10 characters in a story. They could have condensed these down into 4 or 5 people. That way we had time to care about the characterization. The character of Cersei was interesting. She's found this deep-rooted love and appreciation for humans and life as a human, but we don't really get to explore it because the movie doesn't have time to. Angelina Jolie's character Thena probably had one of the most interesting backstories in the film, basically experiencing like the eternal robot version of Alzheimer's. That was a super interesting concept. Angelina Jolie's performance was extremely amazing and on point with the little she was given. I thought that could have been something that we took a deeper dive into, but we just didn't have time to. Kingo's character pretty much being fully immersed in human culture, and for generations after generations, finding himself as a Bollywood film director could have been a really entertaining thing to dive into, but the movie didn't have time to do it. There's that running theme throughout this entire thing. The same thing goes for Fastos and him finding solace in humanity and finding a human companion, and Sprite being trapped in the body of a kid her entire life and never being able to experience love because she's always gonna look like a child. Druid can control the minds of humans, pretty much get them to do anything he wants, but we only get these brief little spurts of it in flashbacks. That's what the entire existence of the Eternals has been. Do we interfere and help out humanity, or do we sit back and let things play out the way they're supposed to play out? While there are a lot of commendable things about this film, there's an extremely wide range of representation in here, but it all feels like fluff when none of it is actually explored. All in all, it had a lot of really good ideas that were just never fleshed out properly due to it being a film. This should have been a Disney Plus series. If you're gonna do that many characters, 10 characters, make it a series. Give us all that backstory for the first few episodes of the series and then bring us into present day. Now we have our characterization and now we know who these people are, and now we can get into why we're supposed to care about these people. To answer the question, is it really that bad? I don't think it's that bad. Like, this isn't a disaster of a movie. It's definitely not 48% on Rotten Tomatoes bad. I would say the scores on IMDb are probably around where I would rank this thing. A 6.5 or a 6 out of 10. Definitely not a 4 or a 5 out of 10. It's definitely not the worst MCU movie. I mean, have you never seen Thor: The Dark World? I've seen Thor: The Dark World 4 times, and I don't remember a single thing about the movie. I love RDJ, but have you ever seen Iron Man 2: Age of Ultron? Come on. Age of Ultron was one of the most boring movies I've ever seen. This definitely is not a bad, horrible, terrible, unredeemable movie. It was just a little too ambitious for its own good. But I would love to know what you thought about Marvel's Eternals down in the comments.